Death happens. Grief sucks. And we need to talk about it. Welcome to Perspectives, a podcast where the clergy women of the First United Methodist Church of San Diego share their musings on scripture, theology, and what it has to do with us. Welcome to this episode of Perspectives. I'm Reverend Trudy Robinson, and today I am here yet again with the wonderful and wise Sheila Cameron, the director of our New Life Counseling Center. And we are continuing our sermon series on taking care of our mind, body, and spirit. And today we're talking about taking care of grief. That is a universal experience. And to look at this subject, we are using the story of the raising of Lazarus, as it is called, from the Gospel of John, chapter 11. And I'm picking out some of the verses within that chapter to kind of make the story more concise. So if you want to read the whole thing, it's John chapter 11. And it goes like this. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus, of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now the scripture goes on to say that there was a purposeful delay before Jesus actually headed towards them. For 2 days, he stayed in the place where he was. And in this time, the scripture says, this illness doesn't lead to death, but to the glory of God. And then we pick up the story at verse 14. Jesus told the disciples plainly, Lazarus is dead. And then at 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who believes in me will never die. And then in verse 32, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. And then at verse 43, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, calling, Lazarus, come out! And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. The story of Lazarus.
Yes.
Yeah, we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we love it. I think sometimes we don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that strikes me in this is Mary and all of the people who had come to be with her.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are weeping, and the grief here just feels so immediate, so tangible.
Yes.
And we can all kind of relate to that, I think.
What strikes me in that is that there was community around her.
Yeah.
That there was not weeping in isolation.
Yeah.
And there was people sharing in that despair with her.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference from what I've found in my work with clients.
Okay.
In their grieving process, the community makes the difference, the biggest difference, actually.
We have a really hard time as a culture with death and with grieving. I think a lot of people feel kind of awkward around that. So the idea of having a community around you, you kind of think, oh, give me a couple of my best friends, and that's about it, right?
Yeah, and that's okay to just have a couple of your best friends.
Okay.
That's enough community. Even the
there you
one
go.
friend might be enough community.
Yeah.
Some people might need more
Yeah.
Some people might be disappointed if their best friend or people who they thought would be there isn't there.
Yeah.
That's also part of complex grief, feeling that deep disappointment for those that don't show up in the way that we envisioned them to show up.
Yeah, yeah. How can we be better as a culture? What do you see happening in our world, our setting around grief?
I think we have to first normalize death and dying. We have to have conversations, larger conversations, and maybe early on in life with death and dying being not apart from the life cycle, but very much a part of the life cycle.
Yeah.
We need to normalize that. And people, I think, struggle with that because they don't want to view their own mortality.
Yeah.
And they don't want to view themselves dying. So then we shy away from that. So I think just first starting off, maybe it's as simple as having conversations with young children around pets dying. You know, that's often when it comes up first, right? It might not be a friend or a grandparent, it might be that pet. And so lean into that. And let's have conversations around what happens when things die. Is this part of the life cycle? And so we could start to normalize it, and that destigmatizes talking about death and then allows us to grieve more easily.
Yeah. I remember serving in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and there was a ranching community there, and being on some of the roundups of the cows and the brandings and all that. And at one point, we noticed one of the calves had been kicked by the commotion, and was struggling and figured there was a puncture of the lung. And I remember kids going over and watching the calf die, and asking me as the pastor to say a prayer for them. And so in that setting, you know, they watch the calves be born on ranches, right? And that kind of life and death cycle, I think, is probably more evident for them. And we are, you know, I live in a community. I will not even put it on my community. I will say, this is what I do.
Yeah.
I don't even like, this is awful, I don't even like to buy chicken breast with bones because I don't want to realize it used to be alive.
It used to be alive. Yes. So there's some, like, we're kind of disconnecting a little bit from this life cycle.
Yeah.
You know, and this isn't to pass a lot of judgment, but sometimes people, it's like the goldfish dies, right? And then some parents are like, or the bunny dies, I got to hurry up and get another one while they're at school, so then they don't have to struggle with grief. That's where it starts, right? It's like, what are we protecting them from versus having a moment to really educate them on this life cycle process, and then to not fear the emotions that come up with grief. The emotions, as painful as they are helpful, healthy, normal, and we don't need to be afraid of those emotions. They'll actually make us more resilient, stronger. We could also talk about not just death, but then the connection that was there and how painful it was because we cared deeply and we loved. So let's not try to put Band-Aids over all of that, but really just take it for what it is and use those moments to really dig deeper and maybe start to talk about things like, well, what happens? Where do people go when they die? Then we could really we can go back to the Word and talk about, what does Jesus say? What does God say about what happens?
Right.
And we could start exposing children and others to that.
I think Christianity in general has kind of moved to a place where we expect everything to be good all the time. And that's not the way it is.
Well, in the Bible, there's not good all the time. There's a lot in there.
Right.
There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of pain and suffering actually in the Bible. So
that's part of the richness of life, right? And it's part of the way in which God shows up. Right?
It's like if we have just highs all the time and all the pleasant feelings, we won't really appreciate them as much. So life is like a heartbeat, right? It's like there's ups and downs, and we got to really understand what happens in those valleys to appreciate the peaks.
That's absolutely. So if we live in a world where we shy away from death, we may not recognize grief. So how do you think grief shows up
Yeah.
for us these days.
I think this is a good time to maybe talk about the stages of grief, actually.
Yes, I've heard of those.
In 1969, there was a psychiatrist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, yes, and she was treating terminally ill patients. And she ended up actually pivoting and looking at what was happening to their loved ones, the survivors, the people that were in bereavement. And she ended up creating a framework called the 5 stages of grief. And then she introduced this model in her book on death and dying. And then the 5 stages of grief are denial, which is shock and avoidance, or avoiding the reality of what has happened. Then there's anger, which is frustration and resentment. And oftentimes that is even anger turned towards God. Or I'll see my patients have anger turned towards the person that passed. How come you left me? How could you do this to me? There's also the stage of bargaining, which is trying to negotiate and find a way out of pain or trying to control the situation. If I only did this, I should have done this. So the shoulda, woulda, couldas. Right? That's trying to make sense and order the chaos that's going on in the loss. Then there's the depression stage, which is, of course, despair and profound sadness, and acceptance. So coming to terms with the loss and adjusting to the new normal. But the 5 stages have been criticized because people thought it was supposed to be like a linear process. And it's not linear at all. So the author actually said, well, she clarified decades later, this is a way to kind of understand what the stages are, but oftentimes we'll waft in between the stages or even skip stages altogether. Because it's a unique approach. It's a unique experience.
Everybody grieves differently, so that makes good sense. In this story, I think both Martha and Mary show signs of that, I think, in some way. Martha, she's the one that, says, you could have been here, you would have saved us, but I know, there was a but really quickly after her statement of that. And I feel like that represents those of us who don't really want to acknowledge it. It's the denial part of it. And she was very quick to kind of smooth over any kind of negativity, at all.
And that's problematic because then we're looking for solutions versus acknowledging what is. And what is hard.
And then Mary is the one, I kind of like Mary a lot in this one, right? Because she, Jesus delayed 2 days. It was 4 days that Lazarus has been gone in the tomb. And she just walks right up to Jesus and says, you should have been here. And
there's the anger.
The anger, that's right, that's right. You should have been there. And that anger towards God. I find it really interesting. The Gospel of John is the one gospel that is most confident in saying Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is God. They're one and the same. And yet here's this story. I mean, if I were Mary and if I believed, and she has confessed she believes in Jesus as God, and if I were Mary, I would be like, I'm not going to say that to God, right? I'm not going to say that to God. But the fact that it's here in this story, I think really does give us that permission to just feel the feels.
Yes, all of the feelings. And trust that God understands and he can handle it.
Yeah, exactly. And the beautiful thing about this, Jesus weeps.
Yes.
Right?
There's the sadness and despair.
Which I think the profound reality is that that empathy, even though there's hope, even though Jesus comes around to say, I'm the resurrection and the life, and that, and we know that that's a part of our faith. In that moment, though, there is solidarity in the grief and the pain of that moment, even though the other moments will come. right?
And both can be experienced at the same time, too.
Yes.
Even if there is hope and someone has faith, there can still be anger and frustration and sorrow and despair.
Yeah.
That doesn't cancel out our hope.
Yeah.
So both things can happen simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? You mentioned that we talked about the community. I think part of the reason we want to buy a goldfish before the kid comes home, right?
Sometimes it's just to make things easier as parents.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
It is a goldfish, but yes. But still, I think we as friends sometimes don't know what to do, and I think a lot of that is because we don't want to feel. We don't want to get too close to that because we don't know what it'll do to us.
Yes.
So how can friends help?
Yeah, sometimes it might not be we don't want to feel.
Okay.
But we might feel like, oh gosh, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Okay.
So it's this, I'm not showing up because I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't want to mess up. But that's like, that's highlighting you in that.
Oh, yeah.
Versus going to the person in grief
Yeah.
and just acknowledging how painful it is.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the sorrow that they're in and just sitting with them in that.
Yeah.
And then even maybe allowing yourself to just say, I don't know what to say right now.
Yeah. That goes a long way.
But this hurts and I will always be here.
Yeah.
When we try to come up with solutions or pleasantries, that's when we then start to invalidate the person's experience of grief.
Yeah.
So let's not do that.
I hate those pleasantries. Yeah. I hate those, sing-song, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Mary's response.
Yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, Martha's response.
Martha, it's well-intended. So we do have to
Yeah.
extend grace to ourselves
True.
if we say that. I know I'm probably guilty of saying those things.
Yeah.
But we show up and we show up imperfectly and we try and we try and try.
Yeah.
And then we realize that we don't have to have a magical script. We just show up and we're present and we
Right.
acknowledge what's going on for them.
Right. The Gospel of John, is a very theological gospel, and it offers some really big ideas about who Jesus is. And one of the commentaries I read, it just noted that oftentimes the disciples can't see that big offering of theological truth for being too focused on the situation at hand, I've always thought that there was a little bit of grace after death in the family's need to create and prepare for a memorial service. You know what I mean? It was a little bit of a distraction that kind of made it not all quite so overwhelming all at once. But that's very situational, right? And so I don't quite know if that's the right way to look at that.
So in preparing for like a memorial service,
Exactly.
sometimes people, that could be helpful, is like, give me something to do because this grief, the feelings are really overwhelming. So then they want to get into, give me a task and let me focus on the task versus focus on the feelings that are arising for me.
Right.
And that might be helpful in the initial stages of grief.
Yeah.
But we do want to come back to checking in on what are the feelings there. Because that could be an act of avoidance of the feelings.
Yeah.
And avoiding the feelings too long could prolong our grief and cause complications for us.
So here's something interesting. The longer I've been in ministry, the more I have seen the scheduling of a funeral or memorial service to move from being like 2 or 3 days after the death, which had been tradition for a long time, to like months out. And I just wonder what that might do for this for the grieving process. I know for a memorial service, I see in the families the greater pressure to get everything in and everything right as they're working through honoring their loved one.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective that you have of seeing a trend with kind of, you're saying stretch it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's more of a scheduling logistical thing
That's-
with families
yeah.
living far and wanting to kind of get it right in that way.
Yeah. I know that's what they tell me. Well, we want to make sure everybody can come.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just the traditionalist enough, I guess,
Yeah.
around this, that I want to say, death is supposed to interrupt life.
Yes.
You know, it's supposed to.
Right. And also it is that ritual of having a service,
Yes.
any kind of ritual acknowledges it
Right.
and puts closure to it.
Right.
And that closure is sometimes very necessary in order to get to that stage of acceptance.
Right.
So I've worked with a lot of clients that are like, I just want to hurry up and get there. Even though I don't want to be
Yes.
there, I want to hurry up and get there because that puts some kind of closure to it.
Right.
But everyone's very unique. Some people are like, I am so numb with this that I can't even think straight. I'm not even fully present. And there are some people that are there, their body is there,
Right.
but then they'll come back in our grief support group and they're like, I don't even remember who was there. I don't remember what was said because there's that numb shock still
Yeah.
going on. So it's a really,
Right.
it's an individual experience
Yeah.
and we don't know until we're there.
Right. I know I always tell families, you know, especially as they're trying to get it perfect, that we can't do it all.
Yeah.
And we don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah.
Because grief is not like that. You can't, it's not a one and done,
Right.
but it's something you have to work on.
There's also sometimes people will have the service and then the meals will stop, the phone calls will stop. And then it's like, okay, well, we wrapped it up.
Yes.
And kind of moving on. And that's oftentimes right after the service is when people will then start to feel it.
Right.
And then they need the people's presence and they need the support.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting dynamic. That's a tricky thing to kind of deal with.
Yeah. And I've also heard that sometimes it's better for friends to just do something rather than let me know what you need.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
It's like
okay.
we want to be very specific with, let me help you do laundry. Let me
Right.
help you with the drop-offs for kids. Let me
Yeah.
help you with making arrangements for X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So be very specific
Right.
as opposed to just putting it on the person who's in grief
Yeah.
because they don't know.
Right.
Everything. They need help with everything.
Right.
And yet they're not going to tell
Where
you.
to begin. Yeah, exactly. So what's your advice to somebody who is going through grief, who has lost somebody?
Yeah. I think it's important to allow yourself to check in with yourself and feel all the feelings and to give yourself permission to mourn in a way that matters to you. And also, as much as we want people to be very specific in how they're going to help us, if we do identify something that we do need help with, ask.
Yeah.
Ask somebody.
Yeah.
There might be disappointment, but we also need to get our needs met.
Yeah. I am just practicing that.
Yeah. Asking for help.
Finally.
Yes.
Right?
I'm proud of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, right? I think, I wish it were easier for everybody to just be available for one another.
Yeah.
And to not quite feel so unable to express what it is we're feeling, and not to have it be so difficult to actually understand what you're feeling.
Yeah. It's inconvenient sometimes to help people.
Well, there it is.
Yes.
I have a schedule.
Yeah, I have a schedule, but life is inconvenient.
Yeah, it is.
And being a friend sometimes is really inconvenient.
Right.
Because it doesn't, their life and deaths don't go according to our plans.
Yeah.
But we have to go back to what is in our value system.
Yeah.
If we value community, if we value being there for people, then we organize our schedule.
Right.
And we be present for each
Right.
other.
If I'm honest, it's those moments when I have been invited into the space of such intense emotion, when love has brought forth such grief.
Yeah.
They are the most sacred moments I've ever had. And I wouldn't turn it away if I had the opportunity.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, after each conclusion of a funeral, I'm back to the checklist sometimes, right?
See, but what you just said was,
Yeah.
it's not only us being available for the griever,
Right.
but it's also what happens to us too,
Yeah.
of being of service to people.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
something just magical happens where we have a shift in perspective,
Yeah.
where something changes within us too that is a sacred thing.
Yeah.
So it's not just me helping you or doing a favor for you, the
Mm-hmm.
person who's in grief. It's also like there's something here that also happens for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an experience that is so important.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that just touches at the core of how we were made, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
that so many other things doesn't reach.
Yeah, I feel the same way being a therapist. You know,
Yeah.
it's like my clients think it's like one way. And I'm like, you guys have no idea
Yeah.
how you're shaping my life. Of
Yeah.
course, I can't express to them all of
Right.
the ways, but I'm like, the fact that I'm so blessed hearing your story or being with
Yeah.
you in this grief, that I have a different perspective on so many things. And I feel
yeah.
more equipped and resilient because I was there with them.
Yeah. That ought to be motivation enough
Yeah.
to really take care of grief
Yeah.
and ourselves as we're going through that, and others as they grieve around us. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
You're the best. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation. We have some questions we want you to consider as you listen to this. And you might want to find a little community or a best friend or two to kind of talk through what these questions might bring up in you. And so I offer these for your consideration. The first one is, what gets in the way of your grieving? The second one is, what hope do you see in this story, or any tenet of faith, really? And the final question is grief ever a good thing? Lots of food for thought. We thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. This is a production of First United Methodist Church of San Diego. To learn more about our events and ministries and to access additional learning resources, visit fumcsd.org.